Outside Nigeria, Zimbabwean independence icon and former President Robert Mugabe has died at the age of 95. Mr. Mugabe had been receiving treatment in a hospital in Singapore since April. He was ousted in a military coup in 2017 after 37 years in power. We have more in this report.
Mr. Mugabe was born on February 21st, 1924, in what was then called Rhodesia, a British colony run by its white minority. He was imprisoned for more than a decade without trial after criticizing the government of Rhodesia in 1964.
If dogs and pigs know their mates, can human beings remain human beings if they do worse than pigs?
In 1973, while still in prison, he was chosen as president of the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU, of which he was a founding member. Once released, he headed to Mozambique, from where he directed guerrilla raids into Rhodesia. But he was also seen as a skilled negotiator. Political agreements to end the crisis resulted in the new independent Republic of Zimbabwe. With his high profile in the independence movement, Mr. Mugabe secured an overwhelming victory in the Republic's first election in 1980. He abolished the office in 1987, becoming president instead, a post he will retain through both electoral success and the use of violence for decades to come. But over his decades in power, international perceptions soured, with an increasing number of critics portraying Mr. Mugabe as a dictator.
There will never be a regime change here. There will always be the people of Zimbabwe in control.
In 2000, facing serious political opposition for the first time, he seized white-owned farms to resettle black farmers, causing economic disruption but boosting his popularity among supporters. Around the same time, pro-Mugabe militias used violence to influence political outcomes. In 2008, when he lost the first round of the presidential election, attacks on the opposition resulted in his rival pulling out of the contest. He famously declared that only God could remove him from office. He was forced into sharing power in 2009 amid economic collapse, installing rival Morgan Tsvangirai as prime minister. But in 2017, amid concerns that he was grooming his wife Grace as his successor, the army, his longtime ally, turned against the president and forced him to step down. Mugabe died in Singapore, where he has often received medical treatment in recent years. His successor, Emmerson Mnangagwa, expressed his utmost sadness, calling Mr. Mugabe an icon of liberation.
Meanwhile, Zimbabweans are saddened by the news of the death of their former president Robert Mugabe, who died at the age of 95. But for residents in Johannesburg, it was an atmosphere of mixed reactions. Mr. Mugabe, the Bourgeois guerrilla leader who led Zimbabwe to independence in 1980 and crushed its foes during nearly 4 decades of rule, as his country descended into poverty, hyperinflation and unrest, was a controversial figure. He was one of the most polarizing figures in the history of his continent, a giant of Africa's liberation struggle against colonialism, whose rule finally ended in ignominy when he was overthrown by his own army.
I think President Mugabe was a leader. Yeah, since he was voted to be the president of Zimbabwe, he led Zimbabwe in a right way. We will say, may his soul rest in peace. He was someone who was a man of his words.
I'm shocked, man. Like, I honestly cannot believe it. Truth be told, Robert Mugabe is one of my idols. You know, Robert Mugabe, Hitler, and Napoleon. For my reasons, you know. But I'm actually surprised. I'm taken by. Like, I'm shocked. It was just the back.
African affairs analyst Ademola Oshodi joins us on the news now to discuss the man Mugabe. Thanks for joining us on TVC News at 7. How do you consider it fair to remember Robert Mugabe, the fundamental role he played in his country's independence, giving black majority rule back to the people. Of course, what people consider broadening access to healthcare and education in the early years of his government, or the portrayal of him as a dictator in the final years of his rulership.
Thank you. I think it's a combination of all you said. He's well known for his liberation struggle, freeing Zimbabwe from white minority rule in Rhodesia, and also negotiating independence with the British colonial masters in the early 80s. But as years gone by, probably the past almost 20 years or more, he's been known to be the person that brought the destruction of the Zimbabwean economy, brought it back to his knees. You have currency of $1 trillion. That's a Zimbabwe $1 trillion equivalent to less than 10 US dollars. It's rather tragic. Investors have left. This country's in dire need of food, issues of famine. It's a huge exodus of people going to South Africa and all parts of Africa. So it's.
I get your point, Ademola, but Mugabe he was in office for 37 years. That's just about 7 years more than someone like Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore. Do you think that this perception of him would have changed if Zimbabwe were to be more prosperous today?
Oh, definitely. If he had gotten the economic policy right, if he had managed the forceful removal of arable land from the white settlers, and had done it in a very compatible way that would not disrupt the economy and the currency, the Zimbabwean dollar, then yes, he would have left a lasting legacy of being an economic success.
Do you think anything really has changed? Because the closest allies he had in the military, and even the current president who was his vice, were with him until about 2 years ago, when the perception was strong that he was going to replace himself with his wife.
Well, the economy is still in a bad shape, and the successor has also tried hard to provide confidence for investors to come in and settle issues with the farmers, but nothing yet has really been apparent. Nothing has been obvious. So it's still a hope with the fact that Mugabe is not there, and there's a sort of interest from all other foreign investors. The Chinese are more interested now in getting more involved in Zimbabwe, especially with the large debt owed to China. I think the Commonwealth is also a little bit more open to discussing issues of bringing them back into the fold. But right now, the economy is still status quo, and it's in a bad shape.
African Affairs analyst Ademola Oshodi, thank you for sharing your thoughts with us on the news tonight.